And like I mentioned, Molly, Donald Trump has declared himself winner of the 2024 U.S. presidential election. Trump made a victory speech before a jubilant crowd at his campaign headquarters in Florida.
In fact, he thanked American voters for the strong mandate. Listen in to what he said.
Well, I want to thank you all very much. This is great. These are our friends. We have thousands of friends in this incredible movement.
Trump, assuming a presidential throne in his speech, caps a stunning political comeback to secure a second term as the 47th president of the United States.
Now, despite predictions that Trump's political career had ended in 2021, he has defied the odds, riding a wave of conservative support back into the White House. And it's only the second time anyone has ever returned to the White House after previously losing a presidential re-election bid.
Results which are still pouring in indicate that Trump has defeated Democrat Kamala Harris, securing a decisive mandate and proving many pollsters wrong in their predictions of a tight race.
And in addition to having won the battleground states of North Carolina, I love these places, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, we are now winning in Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and Alaska, which would result in us carrying at least 315 electoral votes.
And victories for the Republicans in Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia, 3 of the 7 critical swing states, meaning hopes of victory for Kamala Harris turned increasingly slim, and Trump's impressive gains in these states, meanwhile, underscoring his broad appeal across diverse voter groups.
Trump had a whack of praise for his deputy J.D. Vance and his family who joined him on the podium. He also thanked Elon Musk, applauding the tech leader's accomplishments with SpaceX and noting Tesla's stock surge.
Oh, let me tell you, we have a new star. A star is born, Elon. Now he is. Now he's an amazing guy. We were sitting together tonight. You know, he spent 2 weeks in Philadelphia and different parts of Pennsylvania campaigning. You know, he sent the rocket up 2 weeks ago, and I saw that rocket, and I saw it coming down. I saw it. It was, when it left, it was beautiful, shiny white. When it came down, it didn't look so pretty. It was going 10,000 miles an hour, and it was burning like hell. Was that you? He said, yes, it was. I said, who else can do that? Can Russia do it? No. Can China do it? No. Can the United States do it other than you? No. Nobody can do that. I said, that's why I love you, Elon. That's great.
And in fact, as a message of congratulations and messages of congratulations began to come in from around the world, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris is yet to concede defeat, with her supporters saying that they are still keeping the faith. She is expected to address her supporters who gathered at her alma mater, Howard University in New York.
Give it up.
And joining us now is Stephen Golb. He's a lawyer and a political analyst. Mr. Golb, good to see you, and thank you very much for joining us at this hour. What do you make of Trump's victory speech? Let's start from there.
Well, look, visually, one thing I was just initially struck by was the array of people behind him, 30 or 40 people. Almost all of them, at least viewing from a distance, seem to be white. Not all of them, but almost all. And I think that says something about his base of support in contrast with Kamala Harris's base. The speech was, I can't fault him for claiming victory, even though it's not absolutely nailed down yet. It may be a bit premature, but just a bit. The speech was odd, as are many of Trump's speeches in some ways. He brought up and featured Dana White, the fellow who's the head of the Ultimate Fighting Championships fighting sport. in which guys, if you're not familiar with it, guys in the ring and women actually just go at each other in a way that's even more violent than boxing. He praised Elon Musk, and he said Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's anti-vaccine and anti-even putting fluoride in water as a way of protecting teeth, particularly kids' teeth, will play an instrumental role in health policy in his administration. Mm-hmm. So, to put it mildly, it was a somewhat concerning speech, but I can't, as I said, fault him for claiming victory, even though it's not quite nailed down yet.
Mr. Golb, he seemed, or he sounded like a changed man. He's talking about unity, he's talking about democracy, he's talking about freedom of the United States, he's talking about making the United States great again and working with all the adversaries. What do you make of that?
I think to the extent he said it, it may not last long. He's made these noises before very, very briefly. If he does turn around and try to unify the country, that would be great. But you look at his rhetoric throughout his campaign, which was extremely divisive, and I would even say hateful towards women, towards opponents, towards some specific opponents of his. I would not, I'll take that speech with a grain of salt. I'll take it with a degree of hope, but, well, really more with a grain of salt, because I just don't, based on his track record to date and what he did as president previously and what he's been saying in the campaign very, very recently, to the extent he made any conciliatory noises, I think they were pretty minor and an exception to the rule of how he's been acting.
Right. Stephen Golb, just stay on with us, and we will, of course, come back to you to discuss further about whether or not the rhetoric that you just mentioned, which is the quintessential Trump trademark in a way, actually benefited his campaign, and to what extent. Let's go straight across now to Anas Malik, who's standing by. He's been tracking all the developments in West Asia very closely over the last few days. Anas, how exactly are the latest updates being perceived on the ground where you are, given that time and again this question has come up? What would Trump in the White House mean for West Asia?
Well, as Donald Trump took that stage, the drones are back in the sky. I'm not sure if you can hear that buzzing sound, but it's very, very clear here in Beirut. So with him saying that he's going to stop the war, there is a genuine optimism here that this buzzing sound is going to stop going forward. The war is going to stop. There is a genuine understanding or hope that the new U.S. president-elect will force their closest ally, that is Israel, to stop its unilateral aggression on Lebanon. That is what the understanding is. Though there is little hope or there is skepticism around a change in Middle East policy, because remember, both the candidates, be that Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, their foreign policy outlook when it comes to the Middle East wasn't much different, because while they had been calling for a ceasefire in Lebanon, at the same time they had been reiterating their support for Israel's right to defend itself. But now with this, now that we have a seeming clear-cut winner, seemingly enough, and his victory speech where he's made it abundantly clear. So there are hopes, there are renewed hopes among the common people, which I've been speaking to, that A, the war will stop, or the war can stop, and B, they can go back to living their normal lives. There's a silver lining as well, is that currently the ceasefire process, the talks for a ceasefire deal was at a halt because of the US elections. That can go back to being negotiated upon in days, or if not hours, in days to come. We were very close, or we understand that Israel and Lebanon were really close to a ceasefire agreement last week, but the process was stalled because of the US elections. So with the US election now being almost close to over, the hopes for, or renewed hopes for a ceasefire are back, not just within the government, but within the common public as well. Molly?
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Anas, of course, coming back to you for further updates through the day as well. Let's just go straight back across to Stephen Golub. I want to actually, get in your reaction to that sense of optimism to a certain extent. Do you feel that Trump's presidency, given the kind of statements and commitments he's been making in the run-up to the election, will actually yield any results? Will West Asia change dramatically with Trump in the White House?
Well, that's a good question. It's hard to say in terms of other parts of the world. If I were in Ukraine or if I were Ukrainian, I'd be very worried about the withdrawal of U.S. support. That would really hurt Ukraine and really lead to, if not Russia conquering Ukraine totally, just having much more substantial influence of it. And that conflict, if it's settled at all, settled on terms very favorable to Russia. Same thing possibly with Taiwan, the Republic of China, where the country, the People's Republic of China, has been making threatening noises, threatening maneuvers against Taiwan. And with Trump's American first kind of isolationist slant on foreign policy, Taiwan might be in danger. In terms of West Asia, in terms of your neck of the woods, it's a little hard to say. He hasn't talked much about that in terms of the campaign. That wasn't a priority in the campaign, and the U.S. public just unfortunately doesn't pay much attention to foreign policy. A lot depends on who he may bring in as his Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, which brings me to a related point, somewhat related, I want to emphasize in terms of whether Trump has changed. One thing to look at is who the people around him will be. In his first term of office, he brought in people who were considered fairly responsible, if not bipartisan, at least people who could restrain his darker impulses. This time around, he's in a way learned from that first time around. He'll bring in people who are much more likely to be in sync with him in terms of expanding presidential power, maybe abusing presidential power. He has this Project 2025, which is prepared by an organization called the Heritage Foundation, which is could radically reshape the U.S. government in terms of cutting back services, replacing a lot of civil servants with political appointees and the like. And even though Trump himself his mind is not the kind to dig into the details of what's going on with such changes, he may just allow these people to run rampant through his administration and bring about changes that he may not care much about, but that may have deep impact on the American society, American government, freedom and democracy here. And just one more thing to flag, pay attention, a lot of attention to his Vice President, J.D. Vance. Because Trump is 78, he's not in great physical shape, and there is some evidence of instability and cognitive decline. It's not unthinkable that whether it's because of cognitive decline or because of physical ailments, Trump won't make it through these 4 years, and you could be looking at a President J.D. Vance before Trump's term runs out.
Mr. Golub, stay with us because we now have another gentleman joining us. His name is Glenn Deason. He is a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway. Professor Glenn Deason, thank you very much for joining us at this hour. Mr. Golub was just talking to us about Trump's policies when it comes to the wars that are currently going on in Israel and in Gaza, and also in Russia and Ukraine. And he says that Ukraine better watch out. What do you think?
In a strong policy towards ending these forever wars, as they're called. And I also agree that he surrounds himself with a lot of people who think similarly, unlike the first administration, which was by many seen as being infiltrated to a large extent by neocons. We now see the Tulsi Gabbards, Kennedy, and Vance as well, and others who take a very different approach. So I think he's going to probably stick to these policies. Now, on the Middle East, I don't see that big of a difference. I think he's apprehensive about, of course, starting a war with Iran, but so is the current government. But in terms of the support for Israel, I wouldn't see that much of a difference. I would have to agree very strongly on the Ukraine issue, that Ukrainians should be worried. I think the Ukrainian government is probably worried, but the Ukrainians, they overwhelmingly now want peace. They don't want to fight a war which they've already lost. This is simply bleeding their country and preventing any future recovery. So we often see this being done in the name of Ukrainians. We saw when 73% voted for peace formula in 2019, the American under Biden helped to overturn this. When they were close to a deal in 2022, the Biden administration again overturned it. So I think a lot of things are done in the name of helping Ukraine, which has made things a lot worse for the country. So, and I think the same for China, to be honest. I don't see China likely using force against Taiwan. I think they see time as being on their side, and they can use economic tools to reintegrate Taiwan. The only reason they would use military force, I think, is if Taiwan push for secession. And this is something they've also been worried that the Biden administration has been pushing. So I don't necessarily think that Biden and Harris has been standing up for peace in the world and supporting all these countries, when instead I think, especially in the Ukraine war, the Biden administration has been extremely aggressive and indeed triggering this war and then preventing any workable peace. So I think most Ukrainians who are now worried about continuing bleeding out in a war that can't be won, I think many will probably be quite happy to see Trump come into office. At least a key journalist in Ukraine, Panchenko, she was named the Woman of the Year, one of the top influential. She's been also arguing very heavily for Trump, exactly because he's prepared to bring an end to this war.
Mr. Glenn, staying with you, there are so many critics who say that now the elections, after the elections are called and Trump emerges victorious, President Joe Biden will be a lame duck president. What's the period of this president of the United States, this period until January, until Trump is declared or comes into office? Tell us about this period, because many critics say that it will be a very precarious period for not only America, but also for the world.
Well, I think especially the Europeans are very worried about Trump presidency, because they bet a lot on the enduring partnership with the US. They also gambled everything on the war in Ukraine and defeating, again, the world's largest nuclear power. So I think there's a lot of concern there. Now, you heard some talk within NATO that they're speaking about whether or not war-proofing Ukraine from the threat of democracy. In other words, Trump looks like he's going to reduce this, find a peaceful solution. So they would like to find a way of making agreements to ensure that weapons continue to pour into Ukraine even after Trump takes over. Now, it's hard to see how the rest of the world going to adjust to this, but I think, it's probably going to be more. I don't think too many disruptions, to be honest. I think this will also give the Biden administration some flexibility to perhaps do things he wouldn't have to have done if he had to consider the election. For example, again, going back to the Ukraine war, I think the Biden administration has been holding off any negotiations because they would like to make at least the war continue until the election, as failing there was seen as being very negative or for producing a loss in this election. So, but again, it is a lame duck period, so it remains to be seen.
Mr. Golb, he says, Mr. Glenn says that Biden will have some sort of flexibility. Do you agree? Do you think Biden will have that time to, change his policies, for instance, on Gaza, on West Asia?
With respect to Gaza, I think it's a possibility. Now that the election is over, Biden can exert more pressure on Israel, actually, to be more accommodating, to try to seek some peace in Gaza. As you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu just fired his defense minister, who was taking a more reasonable view towards Gaza rather than this endless fighting and endless decimation of the civilian population there. Again, not to dismiss the need that Israel has for security, given how dangerous a force Hamas has been, and it is a terrorist force. Getting back just to a second to Ukraine, I'm a bit bewildered by the notion that the U.S., which has been no angel in many parts of the world, not least your part of the world, where it supported Pakistan years ago against India, much to the shame of the U.S., but with respect to Ukraine, the notion that the Biden administration has been responsible for that war, human rights organizations, independent analysts, humanitarian groups have decried the massive human rights violations committed by Russia in Ukraine in the course of the war. And you have countries like Sweden and Finland deciding to join NATO. That's kind of a vote of confidence in NATO and the U.S. take on the Ukraine war rather than Russia. If they didn't think Russia was a problem, they wouldn't have joined NATO. Finally, you have countries like Poland, Lithuania, the other Baltic republics, Moldova, Romania, very alarmed by what might happen in Ukraine because Vladimir Putin is quite a dangerous fellow and his foreign policy is dangerous. And these countries know quite well what kind of threat Russia can be. So again, I would push back on that. And in terms of whether those countries would prefer, and most Ukrainians would prefer Trump or Kamala Harris, I think there's no doubt that they prefer Harris.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Stephen Golb and Glenn Deason, thanks very much for being here on the broadcast. Of course, a lot of these questions will continue to be discussed. A lot of the answers will remain uncertain at this point, but we're completely out of time at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.